Hi, this is Chris Converse, and in this episode, we'll be exploring two options for centering an absolute positioned element with CSS. Since the properties for position include top, right, bottom, and left, we'll need to account for the element's width in order to center the element horizontally, or the element's height to center it vertically. So if you'd like to follow along with me, download the exercise files, and let's begin by opening index.html in a text editor. And once you have the HTML file open, up in the head area, you'll see we have a link to style.css, which we'll open in a moment. Down in the body area, we have a main article element. And inside there, we have an H1 and a paragraph element. Now to preview the layout we're going to be working with, you can open index.html up in a browser. Here you'll see we have our article element with a blue outline, a slight drop shadow, and a semi-transparent blue background. So the first thing we're going to do is bring a graphic into the article element, and then we'll position that later in the CSS file. So let's go back to our HTML file. Before the H1 tag, let's come in here and add an image tag. So less than sign, img. Next we'll set source, src. We'll set this equal to images / icon _ gondola.svg, and then end the tag. If we save the HTML, go back to the browser, we'll now see the graphic being brought into the article page. Now since we didn't specify a width on the image element, the browser will scale the graphic up as far as it can, which will take up all of the available width in the article element. But we'll take care of this in the CSS file. So let's go back to the exercise files. Let's find style.css. Let's open this in our text editor. And let's first find our CSS rule that uses the article selector, which is down here on line 14. Since we're going to be absolute positioning that image inside of the article, we want to make sure that the positioning properties are in relation to the article element. So down here after box shadow, let's hit a return. Let's come in here and set a position property of relative. So this won't change the position properties of article, but anything positioned inside of article will be positioned in relation to this element. So now let's scroll down in the CSS file. After our paragraph element, let's come in here and create a rule that targets the image inside of the article. So we'll type article space img, put in our brackets, let's hit a few returns. First, let's set a width property of 80 pixels, and then we'll set a height of 80 pixels as well. Next, let's set a position property of absolute. Let's set the top property to -40 pixels. So that will overlap the top border of the article element. And for the left property, let's come in here and set 50%. So with these in place, we can hit save. We can go back to the browser. And now we can see the problem that we talked about earlier, which is the left edge of the image is at the center. However, the graphic goes to the right-hand side of that edge. So the graphic is not being centered inside of this area. Now we have two ways we can adjust for this. The first way is to set a margin left property on the image. Since we're using the left property to position this, we can come down here in the CSS, let's add a margin left property, and let's set the property to half of the width of the element. So we'll set this to -40 pixels. And now if I save my file, go back and reload in the browser, we'll now see that that adjustment centers the graphic. So to visually represent what's happening here, the width of the element is 80 pixels. The left property being set to 50% means the left edge of the image starts in the center. So we set a left margin property of -40 pixels to offset the position, making the graphic appear in the center of the article element. Now another option we have is to use a CSS calculation. Now we talked about CSS calculations in an earlier episode, and this will allow us to center the image with a single CSS property. So back in our CSS file, let's come in here and remove margin left. And for the left property, let's come in here and let's put 50% in parentheses. Before the parentheses, let's type calc, C-A-L-C. And inside of the parentheses, let's hit a space after 50%. Then we'll type a hyphen to subtract, then a space, and then we'll type 40px. So what this will do is calculate 50% of the width of the article element and subtract an additional 40 pixels, giving us exactly the same effect as we had with the margin left property of -40. And you can check that by reloading this in the browser. And now for demonstration purposes, we can take this calculation and apply this to the top property as well. So I'll come down here and copy the calc 50% minus 40 pixels. Let's paste that as the value of the top property. Save your file, go back and reload in the browser, and we'll now see that the image is not only centered horizontally, but also centered vertically in the article element. And now since that particular property won't work for this layout, I'll come back here and change the top property to -40 pixels. And so with these two techniques, you can center position elements within a parent container. Now to learn more about positioning elements or using CSS calculations, check out these two previous episodes available here in the library. And with that, I'll conclude this episode, and as always, thanks for watching.